Hi, everybody. It's time for a little daily dose of more about Pesach, law and lore, halacha, and hashkafa. So today I want to talk about the steps of the Seder, which we call in Hebrew the Seder. The whole idea of the calling it the Seder is that there is a discipline, there's an order. The Siddur has the same idea. There's an order of the tefillot, of the prayers, so that everybody is literally on the same page. There is a certain strength in numbers, and that's why, although individual prayer and individual action is very, very important, at the end of the day, we are protected by the fact that we are a community. So that's why we try, when we're not in quarantine, to have a tefillah b'tzibur, a communal prayer. Now it's much healthier not to be mingling with numbers, and therefore we do stay by ourselves. And there's also a kind of merit, special merit, and value to individual prayer because nobody can really pray for what you want better than yourself. And when it comes to the Seder, this is going to be an unusual year in that families will be celebrating in much smaller numbers, often just couples or families without grandparents. And we hope that this is the first and only time that happens. But today we're going to talk about the Seder, the 14 steps that we use to go through the rituals of the Pesach Seder. So when we ask what is the first thing we do at the Seder, many people will answer, oh, we make Kiddush. No, not correct. The first thing that we do, if you guessed, is we actually go through the steps of the Seder and we sing them. Now, where else in what other religion, in what other culture do you find people singing the table of contents, as a friend of mine once said? But we are an unusual people, so we actually sing those 14 steps in whatever tune you may have, and there are lots of them. So we're going to look at the different steps of the Seder today and try to explain them very briefly so it gives you an idea of what you need to prepare in order to do the proper. This is, you've heard of the 20-step program. This is the 14-step program of Seder Pesach. So after we have sung the 14 steps, and I'm going to say a special word there at the end about the last step and why it's important to do this even before we begin. We'll get there, but let's start with the first step, which is Kadesh. Kadesh, simply, we're going to recite Kiddush. And for those who received the Pesach booklet that I sent out by email, if you haven't and you send me your email, I'll gladly send you the book, the guide. But we have there are different opinions as to how much the cups should hold. If you hold 5 ounces, you've certainly fulfilled your obligation. Some people hold that it's as little as 3 ounces, which is 86 milliliters. And the obligation is to drink the majority of the cup while leaning on the left side. Now, in most Sidarim, the host will say the Kiddush, have in mind that everyone will be Yotze, will fulfill their obligation of the first of the 4 cups, and they can answer Amen. And sometimes individuals are making their own Kiddush. You'll find the full text of the Kiddush in the Haggadah. And of course, the 14 steps are in the Haggadah as well. That's what makes up the Haggadah. There is a custom that because we are acting like royalty on this night with certain things we do, that one person pours for the next person. So just as a king would not have to pour his own wine, so when you're a king or a queen or a princess or a prince, someone is pouring for you. So someone will pour your cup. And that would be for really all of the arba kosot, of all the 4 cups you're going to drink in the course of the Seder. And you do not only have to use wine, you can also have grape juice. Some people are particular to have a red wine, either because some people think that red wine is a higher level of wine, a better wine. It's not necessarily true, by the way. Others because the red wine reminds of the first of the 10 plagues, which was the water turning to blood. So, but it's not absolutely necessary to have red wine. You can have white wine, or you can have grape juice as well. If you can't, there are a lot of different rules. If you can't, for whatever reason, if it's difficult for you to keep your head on your shoulders if you're drinking too much wine, then you can take some wine and dilute it with some grape juice. If you had to, you could dilute it even with some water. But um, it's unless you really have a medical opinion not to drink wine at all, then you certainly can use grape juice and you say the same bracha. If there is somebody that is in a position they can't have any wine or grape juice, then you can contact me and I can tell you what would be an appropriate substitute to take. So that's the first. We're all standing, saying Kiddush, sitting down and then leaning to the left, because again, that's the idea of royalty, leaning in a very relaxed manner, not eating hurriedly as a slave might have to do. And then when we finish, everybody sits down. We move to step 2, which is urchatz. Urchatz is the washing of hands. This is done without a bracha. There are different customs. In many Siddharim, only the leader washes his or her hands, and then everybody else stays there. In other customs, everybody washes their own hands. The idea, there are different opinions as to why this is done, but basically washing the hands, which is an even more important thing to do these days for hygienic reasons, but also ritually speaking, before beginning any eating, there is always the washing hands, akin, maybe a kind of mini mikvah. We're not going in the mikvah, but we're washing our hands at least. And that's this second step of orchatz. Then comes karpas. Karpas is a vegetable, any vegetable that on which we make the bracha of borei pri adama, except for maror. We're going to be eating maror later, the bitter herbs, the horseradish root, or whatever we use for it. We'll get there. But any other vegetable. And the custom is to take some of that vegetable and dip it into mei melach, which is salt water. The salt water representing the tears of the slaves. The whole idea of Pesach revolves around essentially being in the moment as if we were ourselves being freed from slavery and going towards Israel. We have to, the Gemara tells us in the Seder and the Haggadah, each person should look at himself or herself as if he or she is reliving and being liberated and going out of Egypt, just as our ancestors did. So this idea of different things we do that kind of mimic what happened back then. In this case, the tears of the slaves, the salt water. And then there are different opinions as whether to recline or not to recline. It depends what reason is given for the karpas. It's a very mysterious thing in general as to why we do it. Most people hold that it's a symbol of spring. Pesach is a holiday that must be kept in the spring. That's the primary reason why we intercalate the calendar, because as we may have talked about, the difference between our lunar calendar and the solar calendar is 11 days a year. So we're losing a month every 3 years. and therefore we have to periodically put in an extra month, a leap month of Adar Bet, 7 times every 19 years, and that way we can keep the calendar from moving through the seasons, primarily to keep Pesach in the spring. And so karpas, the vegetable, is a representation of spring. Next step is yachatz. We have on the table 3 matzot, 3 complete matzot, and we take the middle of those 3 and break it. There are different opinions as to why 3. We're going to need that for later. But one idea is they represent the divisions of the nation: Kohen, Levi, Yisrael. And interestingly enough, we break the middle matzah, which would represent Levi, to indicate that this tribe of Levi was in and of itself split, because one prominent member, Moshe, would become the ancestor of all the Levi'im, and his brother Aaron, the ancestor of all the Kohanim. In any case, we break the middle matzah. The smaller piece is put back between the other 2, but the larger piece is wrapped in a cloth or a napkin, and it is going to be hidden, later to be used for the afikomen. Now, we will come to the afikomen in a moment, but this is a time-honored custom. When there are children present, there are 2 possible customs. One is that the children hide the matzah, and then the adults have to figure out where it is, or pay a quote-unquote ransom of a prize, or the adults hide it, and the children have to find it. In either case, the primary purpose is to keep the children interested so that they stay up throughout the Seder, because the finding of the afikomen is going to come much later. So they have to stay up. It's customary for children to take a nap Erev Pesach, so that they'll be able to participate, since the transmission of this story, of this tradition, of these traditions to the younger set, this is a major, major aspect of the Pesach holiday. So you can't transmit anything to the kids if they're sleeping. So this is one way of keeping them awake, and other people have various creative ways of keeping their children awake as well, children of all ages. Next comes what we would probably consider the longest step of the Seder, step number 5, which is Magid. And here we have a Seder plate with the various items, which we'll talk about at another time. And it's lifted, the matzot are uncovered, and we begin telling the story of Pesach in its fullest extent. And included in this step in the Haggadah would be the drinking of the second cup, the 4 questions, the story of the Arba Banim, the 4 children, the 10 plagues, describing Pesach, Matzah, and more. There's a lot in here, and this forms really the bulk of the Pesach Seder. There are 2 mitzvot d'oraita, biblical mitzvot, that we can do today. One is the eating of matzah, and the other is the telling of the Pesach story, Sipur Yetziat Mitzrayim. So this is very, very important, and of course it's going to be as long or as short as the group present makes it. But the Haggadah certainly helps us by giving us a text that we can read in Hebrew or English, and that will guide us as to our discussion. At some point, as you'll see in the Haggadah, we have the next step of Rachza, which is everybody washing their hands, reciting the bracha al netilat yadayim in order to prepare for the things we're going to eat, culminating in the end with the afikomen. The first thing we're going to do after washing our hands is we're going to recite the bracha on the matzah. Now, this is one of the unusual times when we actually recite 2 brachot on the same thing. The first will be the usual bracha on bread, hamotzi lecha min haaretz, but the second bracha will be Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu al achilat matzah, that blessed is God who commanded us to observe this mitzvah of eating matzah. So we're going to recite both these brachot, and we're going to then take the top two matzot, and we're going to divide that and pass that to the crowd, and that's something we're going to eat while leaning. Interestingly, we lean while we eat something that's a symbol of our liberation. Matzah, although it has the quality of being poor bread, so to speak, lechem oni, the meager fare that the slaves ate, it also is a symbol of our devotion to God, that we did not wait for the bread to rise in order to follow Hashem as we left Egypt on our way to Israel. So in the end, this becomes a symbol, although it's matzah has two sides, one of representing slavery, one representing liberation. We accentuate the liberation side and we lean while we eat the matzah. Next comes the eating of the maror. Now the maror, in tradition, bitter herbs, again, reminding us of the bitterness of the slaves, and therefore when we eat this, we will not lean to the side. Maror can be represented by different items depending on the custom. Most people in Israel are using lettuce of one type or another to fulfill this mitzvah of maror. The purists are using horseradish root, chazeret. This would not be fulfilled by bottles of horseradish that have already been processed. That we cannot use for the mitzvah of maror, but certainly horseradish root can be done. And there too we say a bracha. This is also a commandment, but a rabbinic commandment. And we use the bracha similar to the matzah, but here ala chilat maror. It's in the Haggadah as well. And we eat the maror. Next comes the mitzvah of korech, of the sandwich. It really should be called a korech because it came before the Earl of Sandwich. And this is accomplished by taking maror and taking charoset. Charoset is a dish, a food that is made very differently by different customs. Apples, cinnamon, honey, nuts. There's all kinds of different ways of making it. It is meant to approximate or mimic the cement or mortar that the slaves had to build, used with their bricks to build what they were told to by the Egyptians. So we would combine the maror and the charoset in a kind of sandwich between two pieces of matzah from the bottom matzah of the three matzot, and we eat those together in a kind of sandwich. And here too, there are different opinions whether one reclines or not while eating the sandwich. And this was the invention or the addition of the great sage Hillel. So you could call it a Hillel, and you would be more correct than calling it a sandwich. Then comes the meal. We've already said the bracha and the matzah. So now the meal begins, and there are many different customs as to what you eat in the meal. One common custom is to begin with a hard-boiled egg dipped in salt water, but other people have many other different customs as well. The rule here is that pretty much anything goes except roasted meat should not be served, because that would make people think that we are still eating from the Pesach offering of the lamb, which we don't do today. So we try not to roast meat, which is the way you had to eat the Pesach offering. And you can pretty much take your time for this meal. However, it's important that it finishes in enough time to eat the afikomen. That has a certain time frame when you are until when you are allowed to eat the afikomen. So this year in Israel, 12:41 would be the latest to conclude your meal, and then whoever is hidden the afikomen is convinced to bring it out. It's that last piece of matzah that we eat as a closing dish closing taste of the meal, so that the taste of the matzah lingers in one's mouth all the way throughout. Matzah being the most important food here, obviously. That afikomen is called safun, which means hidden, because the matzah was hidden. The next step, of course, comes with the Birkat HaMazon, with blessing after the meal. And as we do at any festive meal, we try always to make it even more royal and more elevated. We have a cup of wine. So we pour the third cup of wine, and we're going to recite the Birkat HaMazon, in a sense, on that cup of wine. And we will drink from that wine as well. And then comes Hallel, the reading of the special psalms that are said on the Shalosh Regalim as well, and the rest of the Shalosh Regalim, and also on Rosh Chodesh, etc. And we pour the fourth cup of wine. Here we pour an extra cup for Eliyahu Hanavi. There is a dispute. There are 4 expressions of liberation in the Torah, and according to many, this is the reason why we have 4 cups of wine. Not everybody agrees, but that's certainly a majority opinion. There is, however, a 5th expression, which is not so much liberation, but bringing us into Israel. Veheveti, says God, I shall bring you into Israel. Not out of slavery, but into Israel. So there's a dispute. Should we have a 5th cup or not? Well, the opinion of the sages ultimately was, we're not sure. Let's compromise. Let's pour the cup, but not drink it. So we're giving some honor and kavod to that 5th expression, but we're not going all the way and drinking it. How will we know what we should do? Well, ultimately, we shall ask Eliyahu, Elijah the prophet. By tradition, Eliyahu never died. He went to heaven in a fiery chariot, but by tradition he never died, so he'll be around to ask, what should we do? Should we add that 5th cup or not? And Eliyahu also has the elevated merit of being the one who will introduce, or he will come before the Moshiach as a kind of advance guard. And so at that time, he will answer all the unanswered questions. We sometimes say, Teku, that Tishbi, Yitaret, Kushiot, Ubayot, that Tishbi, Eliyahu is known, Eliyahu Hanavi, Eliyahu Tishbi, from an area of Israel that he came from. He'll be the one to answer these hard questions that the sages were not clear on. And so one of them will be, should there be a 5th cup or not? So by tradition, we open the door. This year, I guess we've got to be careful about opening the door and who comes in. But in a symbolic way, we're welcoming Eliyahu, and it's said by tradition that he takes a sip out of every cup. So I guess he's, in his exalted position, he's somewhat immune from any problems with the virus. Finally, the last section of the Haggadah is what we call Nirtza, where we proclaim essentially that, God should accept our prayers, that we were privileged to go through the 14 steps of the Haggadah. We traditionally end by singing L'Shana Haba B'Yerushalayim, and then there are any number of songs that follow. Different traditions have different songs. Some Haggadot end essentially here, but most of the traditions, most of the customs are to continue with a lot of singing. I want to just add one final note about the Nirtza. Nirtza means literally acceptance. And what's important, especially for us, is to say that we try our best. It's difficult to keep all the laws of Pesach, to go through the Seder in a perfect fashion. But let's remember, Nirtza, in the end, God accepts us. God understands our limitations and knows that all we can do is really our best. And so it's a beautiful ending to the steps of the Seder to say, Nirtza, you did your best, you tried, God accepts you as you are, and understanding that if you weren't completely perfect, well, you'll do better next year. And I think that's a beautiful statement that kind of puts a beautiful finishing touch on these 14 steps of the Seder. Of course, if anyone has any questions, you can always write, but this is a kind of thumbnail sketch of the way that we go through the Haggadah, and you'll see much, much more detail, of course, as you read this in the Haggadah. So we'll be back next time with some more halacha and hashkafa, some laws and insights into Pesach and into the Seder.